Hello, welcome to Screen Talk with yours truly, Nomfanelo. So, for this video, I'll be discussing my issues with Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, with the emphasis on Part 1. So, I previously talked about the other Mission Impossible movies, but that was for the Movies I Love videos. So you could check that out. It's already out on the channel. So, I do want to say before we start that I will be getting into spoilers for this movie. So, if you have not seen the movie, you could click out now and come back once you've seen it. But if you don't care about spoilers, feel free to continue with this video. Let's start with the AI, or as this movie calls it, the entity. So, the way that this movie goes about it, by having the entity essentially be its own thing, where it could think and feel, predict, all that stuff, that leans heavily towards sci-fi territory. And I get that the director, Christopher McQuarrie, who also co-wrote the script, he wanted to delve into AI because of it being a relevant topic and all that stuff. But the way it goes about it here for me was just the wrong approach. Now, it could have instead, if he was really keen on exploring AI, just to, let's say, have the entity be created by either a rogue agent, scientist, or whoever, created to, let's say, either go after IMF, government agencies, or to somehow control people, because since everyone is on their devices essentially all the time and we're dependent on electronics. So I felt like the movie could have done that approach. That way it doesn't go into sci-fi territory. So Gabriel is a villain in this movie. He's not the villain. It seems like that's shared with the entity. And for me, it didn't quite work with having both of them being the villains. But I felt as though they could have just had Gabriel be the main villain, since he has the past with Ethan Hunt and all that stuff. I didn't really get why Gabriel is acting as the messenger for the entity. Is it because of the shared past with Ethan? I don't know, because Gabriel, honestly, I don't know if this is because of the age, but he just doesn't seem to be tech friendly and all that stuff. But yeah, I just felt that the movie should have had Gabriel as the main villain, where Gabriel, let's say, could go after Ethan Hunt for whatever happened in the past. He goes after him for revenge and all that stuff. But and also too, it was unclear who was this mysterious woman that Gabriel killed that Ethan cared for. For me, that part was frustrating. I just didn't get, what was Gabriel's motivation other than to serve under the entity and all that stuff. The movie could have make it more personal, since Gabriel knows Ethan. The villains prior to this, they didn't really know Ethan, at least on a personal basis. But with Gabriel having that shared past with Ethan, it makes it more challenging for Ethan and co to defeat him. So yes, it should have went with that approach than with whatever they did in this movie. Nicholas Hoult was originally supposed to play the villain in this movie, and he did an interview, I believe, on the Happy, Sad, Confused that I saw, where he said that I guess he was attached to doing the movie, but because of the pandemic, the scheduling changed and he couldn't play the villain, and it ended up having Isai Morales to play the villain. Now, it seemed like, from, if I were to guess, based off casting, they probably changed the villain quite a lot, because I imagine with the Nicholas Hoult version, he was supposed to play a hacker, which I guess would make sense with the AI portion. But with but now, like, with a different actor playing the role. It just did not quite work with him and the entity together. Also, too, let's talk about Paris. So Paris is what, Gabriel's henchman, played by Palm Clementov, if I am saying her name right. She played Mantis in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and I like the approach of her being the silent villain in a way. Well, she does talk, but in French. I didn't get, like, towards the last act when Gabriel tells her that, oh, you're going to betray me. You're going to tell, Ethan about the submarine and all that stuff. That just came out of nowhere. Because also, too, I wondered, like, how Gabriel's able to predict all this stuff, or is the entity feeding him all this stuff through an earpiece or something? I don't know. That was confusing to me, but that was just weird. It came out of nowhere. But yeah, she's a capable villain, like a henchman and all that stuff. But I just did not get that revelation towards the last act. Maybe it was because that Ethan saved her life during their fight sequence. The two agents that are pursuing Ethan Hunt, I did not like those characters at all. I get that they were essentially hired to go after Ethan after what went down at the meeting with the intelligence agencies, but it was just weird that they just popped out of nowhere, where they happened to stumble upon Ethan's location without using without getting any prior info or using any technology and all that stuff. They just happened to show up where Ethan was, and that makes me wonder, like, how how did this happen? And also, it was kind of annoying where it is clear that Ethan is not the threat and all that stuff, but yet they still want to go after him. Particularly when, what was it? Ethan is fighting Gabriel on top of the train, and then one of those guys tells Ethan to stop and all that stuff, which made easy for Gabriel to escape. Honestly, that was just ridiculous when that happened. I get the purpose of them going after Ethan, but they just ended up being a nuisance at the end. Speaking of nuisance, we have to talk about Grace. Oh my god, I did not like her character at all. It's fine, like, for a character to be a thief and all that stuff, but I just hated that whenever Ethan helped her out or saved her, she just ended up running away afterwards, which was just frustrating. Now, I get at first it will be because of trust issues, but even after he saved her from the bad guys and the police and all that stuff, she still ended up running away, which I did not get why she does this. Because she's just making herself more vulnerable to the threat, because she could have just stayed with Ethan, but nope, she had to run away. And then also to the fact that, oh, Gabriel essentially had Ethan decide whether to save Grace or Ilsa. I mean, of course, we're all going to say save Ilsa, because who cares about Grace? Because since Grace essentially does not want to be there and all that stuff, is all about the money. From that part, also too, did not make sense at all. Grace ends up becoming an IMF agent. I'm like, why? Because she does not have the skills, honestly. She can't even drive a car. When that whole sequence of her and Ethan trying to get away from the police, she had a hard time driving the car. So yeah, I don't get her deal, honestly, and just where they went about with her character towards the later half was terrible, essentially. And let's talk about Ilsa. So I like Ilsa. I would say Ilsa, in ways, she's a counterpart to Ethan and all that stuff. But I said this when I first saw Dead Reckoning, and I'll still stand by it. She did not need to be in this movie. I felt that because she was tied up with the syndicate, it made sense for her to be in Rogue Nation and Fallout. And then once that ended, I felt there was no use for her character. Now, had, let's say, by the end of Fallout, she was offered the chance to be part of IMF, then of course it makes sense for her to be in this movie. But since that didn't happen, I felt there was no need for her to be in this movie. Benji. So I previously said in when I talked about Mission Impossible 4 to 6 that Benji was a capable agent and all that stuff. I kind of need to clarify those points. So I think he's good at being the tech guy and all that stuff that he kind of shares with Luther. But I just felt like at times he just becomes annoying, where whenever Ethan has to do something that's daring, he always has to complain to Ethan, like, "Oh, Ethan, come on, like you gotta do it, just suck it up." I mean, that happened when Ethan had to do the big jump with the motorcycle. He's like, "Oh, just suck it up." I'm like, if you find that's easy, Benji, why don't you do it? You know, it's just moments like that just annoyed me with Benji and all that stuff. And especially since he's an agent himself, he should have at least some more sympathy towards Ethan since they've worked together since the third movie. Ay, yay, yay. Also too, let's talk about Ethan. So of course, Ethan, he's always great at what he does. But there was a part in this movie where apparently, I forgot what character said this. No, I think Ethan said this himself, where he said that, oh, Gabriel essentially made him, he made him like the person that he is in this movie, which I find that just completely was left field. That was similar to, if you've seen Bad Boys 3, which is what, Bad Boys for Life, the moment when Mike Laurie, played by Will Smith, said to Marcus that with the female villain made him as Mike Lowry and all that stuff. And for me, I just hate when franchises, especially this late, do stuff like this. It was just ridiculous because when they do stuff like this, it kind of changes the perspectives of the previous movies. So for me, that was just unnecessary. We didn't need that. Oh my god, because outside of what Ethan's saying that stuff, I didn't really see how that was applicable in terms of how Gabriel shaped Ethan Hunt. That was just random. I felt like that was an excuse to try to tie what the previous films together and all that stuff. We didn't need that. Um Also too, let's talk about the IMF. Now, I'll probably get into this more when I talk about the franchise as a whole in another video, but I just question the legitimacy of this organization because it seems like almost every movie, with the exception of probably the second one, where this agency is always looked upon in a negative light, either with corruption, where someone in the agency is a bad guy, or they're being investigated by outside parties. Because I just question, what is the point of IMF when you have all this stuff happening? Because it makes you think that why aren't they shut down at this point? And that scene when Kittredge is meeting with the different heads of the intelligence agencies, I felt like the purpose for that was to serve exposition on what is the entity and all that stuff. So when you have scenes like this, it just becomes redundant at the end. Like it kind of just, for me, goes out of nowhere and all that stuff. But it was interesting that, yeah, Ethan, he essentially was undercover to essentially what, confront Kittredge and all that stuff. Interesting moment, but for me, that scene could have been workshop better. Um, Also, to the action. The action in this movie I felt was very paint by numbers, nothing special. Um, the the jump, that big motorcycle jump towards the last act. I remember at the time I kept seeing promos for that movie where they keep saying, "Oh, this is one of the best stunts," and all that stuff with the featurette. And then when it came to see that jump unfold, it was just underwhelming. Like for me, there was no big payoff. I get that Tom Cruise always has to risk his life to do stunts like this, but just if it's not choreographed well or if there's no payoff, then for me, just wonder what is the point of that scene. It could have been better. And apparently, like with the train sequence, when the trains were tumbling down, my brother, who's into video games, told me that apparently they copied a sequence from Uncharted 2. And people mentioned that, and then the director said yet he wasn't aware of that reference. I don't know if that's believable, but maybe it's a coincidence. But yeah, and I felt with that sequence was just ran too long when the trains keep tumbling down. That could have been more quicker, but yeah. But my main issues, I would say, with this movie, there's really two things. First part is that this movie is a part one. Now, had let's say this movie ended on a cliffhanger where let's say Gabriel, he actually gets the key, he's able to escape, and the characters, everyone in the train, their lives are at stake because of the bridge being demolished and all that stuff. That would have been worthwhile because we would have no clue on how things would go and all that stuff. But since that didn't happen, I question what is the point of this movie being a part one. There was just really nothing really to look forward to because Ethan has the key. Now what? I guess we'll go after the entity and all that stuff. This could have been workshopped better. Just leave it off on a cliffhanger. Or they could have just made this whole thing a complete movie. But apparently, the Chris McQuarrie said that he always wanted this to be a two-parter. And just how this was executed, for me, it just did not make sense at all. And then the final thing for me that really irked me was that apparently this movie had no script. Now, I first found out about this when I saw a review of Dead Reckoning by Deep Bluff Council on YouTube when they reviewed the movie. So I'll just share what they've said about that part once I make this full screen.
There is no script. Spoiler alert, this film didn't have a script.
We didn't really have a script as such.
There is no script. It's an outline. And they just pick 6, 5, whatever, how many key action scenes that they want.
obviously McHugh as the director is also the writer. And so he knows the sort of the shape, at least, of it, and the large sort of set pieces. But him and Tom like to work together and almost kind of make it up as we go. Not as sort of.
It would be great if Tom Cruise did this. We put him on a train. What if we put him on a train this time? They just chart it out and they just start working on those scenes. They start working on those scenes because they're really difficult to do. And then they just figure out the scenes in between those scenes with the talkies.
The thing is, like, the story is always changing, so there's like, right? It's like always ongoing conversations with Tom and McHugh, and it's just, we kind of go with the flow, right?
The director of the film called them the scenes that say the reason why. So it's literally just, we talk to give us a reason to go to the next scene. We do the big set piece, and then we stop and we talk again. We do the next big set piece, and then we stop and we talk again. That's the whole movie.
We didn't know exactly where we're going to go with it. It was trying to figure out where our characters would go each step of the way.
So it's very clear the intent of what we're trying to do here. So I don't think we'll ever get emotionally attached to these characters because we're not doing the work to get us there. The thing that felt the most
but that's what I'm complaining about.
Yeah, but would you complain about it if that's the goal?
Yes.
Yeah, that was just frustrating. I didn't get why they didn't have a script to begin with, because as a writer, when you hear stuff like this, that's just a big no-no. Like, you need to always have a script before you shoot, because the script is essentially the blueprint of the movie. Without the blueprint, you're screwed. One of the podcasts I listen to is Script Apart, and Christopher McQuarrie, he was a guest on that podcast. This came out, I would say, weeks after the release of Dead Reckoning. And essentially, he said in the podcast that he had no first draft at all. There was no script. Apparently, what went down is that he was working on Top Gun Maverick, and I guess he wanted to work on this movie fairly quickly after Top Gun Maverick. Now, obviously, things changed because of the pandemic and all that stuff, but he did not want to wait years to do this movie, and instead he kind of rushed into it, and essentially during filming they just made stuff up as they went along.
We have to keep the movie going no matter what, no matter at what pace. We just have to keep everybody working. And we had 1 hour Zoom calls every single day. We brought all the departments together. Everybody started analyzing and breaking down the movie and all the things we'd been preparing. And Eric and I were still trying. That's when the real writing of the screenplay began. So we had, it was very backwards. And as a result, the script was coming together piecemeal based on where we would be shooting and what resources we had, and there was no plan.
When I see stuff like this, it tells me early on that this movie was destined to fail from the get-go. Because, especially with this type of movie where it has a lot of moving stuff, you cannot make stuff up as you go along. Even if, let's say, this was, let's say, like an indie, small-scale movie, like a drama, where not much action is happening, you still need to have a script at the end of the day, because you need to book where you're going to shoot, and do all that stuff that you typically do in pre-production. It was just a weird choice for McQuarrie to do this stuff, and just learning that kind of explains a lot in terms of the flaws of this movie that could have been prevented had they actually take the time to write the script instead of just delving right in. quickly. I hope for you writers out there or anyone that's in filmmaking, please do not do stuff without a script. Now, it's fine to do changes as you go along, but you need to have a script because without a script, you are screwed. Just rewatching it recently, yeah, like the flaws are still noticeable and all that stuff, but for me, I rank this, I would say it's the worst movie of the franchise thus far. Now, I do plan to watch the Final Reckoning because I'm seeing that on the opening day on Thursday. And we'll see what happens with that movie. But oh man. So after this, I'll be making a video where I talk about the franchise as a whole, see, if it's actually going to be the final one, or is there room to explore stuff? So I'll probably talk about that in that video, so stay tuned for that. So if you want to support me, you can visit buymeacoffee.com/dumpymalloy, where you could donate one time or monthly, but also too, you could check out the posts I have there and follow me there and all that stuff. Also too, if you want to follow me on social media, my links are in the description. And I want to say thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope to catch you on the next one.